Badlands, what are the Badlands? Explain those Badlands. That's a hell of a name.
Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everybody, depending on where in this world you happen to be. We are very happy to be joining you again for our first jointly hosted show of 2025. How you doing, Gordon?
I'm good, man. I'm good. How are you?
I'm okay. I'm all right. Congratulations on your new show.
I appreciate it. Yeah, we'll have to get you on there for one of these episodes, but a little different from this show in terms of the format and presentation. But it's also, I feel like it works like almost parallel to it because it's kind of like doing what we do on this show, but in the more immediate past.
Yeah. No, it's fun. Yeah, we tend to handle these 2,000 year scopes of history, and then there's different games within games. That's always fun.
So I'm trying to keep that mindset when I do the show is like not going back to like 1930 because it's like that's what we do on this show. So
right. Well, so yeah, I mean the real great idea, this idea of breaking history, people tend to think of breaking news, but then news is always featured acontextually with no dynamics, no sense of why things are happening. It's just this is the case, this is it. It gets very chaotic, very overwhelming as far as information overload easily, and that's by design. I think that the sheer complexity, the use of creating complexity, opposing narratives that are disjointed, are designed to really break people's minds from the natural human yearning to know why things happen. Because if you understand why things happen, then you have a power to act upon the things you understand. So the less you understand, the less your power to act is going to be achieved, and thus less your sovereignty, and you'll be more of a victim floating in the seas with waves being shaped by forces that want you to remain ignorant. So I think this shows it's a fun concept, and I'm really, really happy that today, we've got a lot of history that we're living through at the moment. Today we're going to talk about some material that's going to touch on Canada, the continent, on BRICS, seeing a new member with Indonesia, the fourth most populated country in the world, joining the BRICS, and a few other things, psyops galore. So before we do that, should I read today's first ad?
Yeah, let's hit the ad and we'll get rolling.
Yep. Okay. Here we are. So the first one is from, I believe, Goldco. So I'll read that out. Goldco. The last 4 years have put so much stress on American family finances. Help end the stress now with President-elect Donald Trump, and by investing in gold and silver. Join the thousands of hardworking Americans taking proactive steps to help protect and safeguard their savings with our partners at Goldco. Goldco has been established as a top-rated precious metals company and a leader in the gold industry, providing white glove treatment for over 10 years. Their buyback guarantee assures you that if your situation changes, they will repurchase your metals at the best price, providing you with the peace of mind. You'll have the peace of mind that comes from knowing that your hard-earned assets are securely diversified. Find out the relationship between gold, silver, Trump, and you with the free report focused on Trump and your financial future. You may even qualify for up to 10% back in bonus silver. Visit badlandsgold.com to claim your free information, and instantsilver.com/badlands to see how much free silver you can get. That's badlandsgold.com and instantsilver.com/badlands to take control of your financial destiny. All right. So many directions we can go in, man. So many directions we can go. What do you think is the most appropriate thing to do today?
Let's start with Canada, man, because, I mean, you did a great show on it last week, and which was very timely. I feel like we've been doing that lately, where we did a show on Syria, and then the Syrian government was overthrown, and then you did a solo show, and I appreciate you picking up the slack so I could spend the day with my kids. You did a solo show last week on Canada, and then the Canadian Prime Minister resigned. So let's start there.
Yeah, why not? There's a lot to this. I just posted a little thing on my Substack too on Trudeau. What did I call it? I called it Trudeau flushing and the North American Union, a word of caution. So taking the good and the bad, because I'm enjoying this. I enjoyed it. I figured with this topic, we might want to start with a word from Justin himself. There's a 41-second excerpt from his. It's not really a resignation speech so much as it is a weird ego-driven assertion of just how he's too awesome for people to realize how awesome he is and how much he loves Canada. So, he's just too much of a fighter and a warrior, as he calls himself, in defense of Canada, and Canadians don't understand that. So he announced that he will eventually resign sometime at the end of March. He'll step down at some point. There's a lot of ambiguity. So let's just listen to Justin first, and then we can unpack a little bit of that and see where it's going.
I intend to resign as party leader, as prime minister, after the party selects its next leader through a robust, nationwide, competitive process. Last night, I asked the president of the Liberal Party to begin that process. This country deserves a real choice in the next election, and it has become clear to me that if I'm having to fight internal battles, I cannot be the best option in that election. Mes chers amis, comme vous savez, je suis un fighter.
That was a little Fringlish there. As you know, I am a fighter. So that was his. It's a longer 20-minute or so speech. Pretty pathetic speech overall, but I gotta say it's there's some good and some weirdness. Like I said, one thing is that people have been celebrating like the Ewoks just won against the Empire, and I gotta say that's a little extreme because at the end of the day, what's happened here is, as I mentioned, it's just he announced he will resign as the party is going to be called upon to find a new leader. They're not doing an election. You would think that if the whole nation and your own party is rejecting you, that you would call an election or something of that sort. It's in a minority government. If they had the opposition parties, they could immediately call a snap election if they have a vote of no confidence. That's not happening. So instead, what they're doing is they're shutting down the government. It's called a prorogation of parliament.
All right. So can you explain to the American audience here, because I don't quite understand it either, how that all works? So just to be clear, he hasn't officially resigned yet. He's only announced an intent to resign.
Yes.
And I've been tracking like the Israeli stuff obviously for a while. And in Israel, as I understand it, they have like a European form, like parliament system where you don't vote for individuals, but you vote for parties. In Israel, you vote for parties. Parties are allocated certain numbers of seats. They campaign using specific politicians, but once they win the election, they then appoint people to each seat. So it's like you're not electing in Israel. You're not electing specific people. You're electing a party, and then the party is basically giving you the people who campaigned for those seats. But then that requires the party, like the winning party, the majority party, the people who win the most seats, which is always under 50%. To then go around and form a coalition government. They have to go get other parties to agree to support them as the leader. And then the person who puts together the coalition government appoints a prime minister. And that's how like Netanyahu has stayed in power for as long as he has. That's my understanding of how Israel works. Yeah. How does that translate to Canada?
It's extremely similar. It's both based on the British parliamentary model, which sort of seeded itself into the European Union system as well. So the idea is party politics. The American Republic is not a party political system. That was very clear at the founding documents. In the George Washington even warned, if you allow yourself to start taking on the practice of party politics, you're going to be in big trouble. Don't do it. Mm-hmm. And so one of the benefits of a real authentic Republican system is that even if you're a member of the Republican Party and your party is, let's say, under Dick Cheney's influence and going for a bombing of Iraq or something, you can be a Ron Paul and you can stand up and abide by your conscience as an individual with a conscience and say, I denounce this policy that my party is doing. In a parliamentary system based on party politics, which as far as I could tell, all parliamentary systems have a party format with whips, assigned to keep every individual within the party in alignment with a certain lockstep narrative. If I try to speak up against some vicious policy on whether COVID lockdowns or whatever else that is hurting my conscience, if I do that, I will be kicked out of the party. The whip will come to our door. I will be isolated. I will be, basically the career is destroyed at that point, which did happen to a number of liberals. And this goes through like liberal members of the Canadian government over the years. even though they advocated the idea that we're liberal, we respect diverse opinions, but it's like, yeah, no, you don't. So yeah, there's that function to it. As you said as well, only the delegates of the party ultimately decide on the party leaders, the party leadership. So that's there. Now with the case of what Justin has announced, we got to keep in mind there's a lot of chaos reigning. There was already over 8-9 months ago a sort of resistance within the Liberal Party. There were documents being circulated amongst members of the Liberal Parliament, which called for a new leader, because clearly the population, even on the left side of the aisle, generally despises Justin Trudeau. He's so detached. He's like, it's weird to listen to him speak. He only has one affect in his speech, which is like somebody who's just in a trance, just reading only from teleprompters. There's no human soul that is visible in just the gait, how he walks, how he speaks. There's nothing there. He's an automaton. And so they were already sort of setting the stage to try to shake things up and to get him out. But who is that going to be? And so in a healthy situation, you would again call for an election, which would be the right thing to do. They're not doing that. They're shutting down the government, and that's so they've gone to the Governor General, which is the hand of the crown in Canada, which has given her royal assent, because everything has to be given. Everything has to get royal assent from Governor Generals in the Commonwealth British parliamentary system. So that's being done, and now the assent has been to shut down the government. So basically, everybody's told to go home. No government. All bills being debated are all stopped. All committee bills, all current bills, everything, all inquiries in the Senate have all been shut down. They will not be restarted. Everything gets reset when Parliament is called again, and I guess it's going to be in April or something. But the functions of the civil service, which is where the real power resides, the Privy Council office, the Prime Minister's office, these are sort of the nerve centers of the cybernetics governance structure, which is a centrally commanded governance structure. That's the shadow government of Canada, which manages most of the elected functions. That's still in operation. That doesn't go away. So with that, you still have their ability to act upon crises, things like that. The government can still respond to emergencies according to certain emergency protocols that have been put into place years ago. So the judiciary is still operational, the foreign affairs is operational, which is the right thing to do. You don't want to totally shut down the government. But now the thing is, are we going to get Chrystia Freeland? She's a Rhodes Scholar who's behind a lot of the worst decisions that have been made in the Canadian government. She's still the deputy prime minister. So even if you do end up getting Justin to completely remove himself even before this party election of the new leader at the end of March, well, legally she would be the one then to be the interim prime minister. So we don't know. He's going to try to hold on to remain the interim prime minister. She might, if he doesn't and he fails, then she's going to be, Chrystia is going to be the interim prime minister.
So how does that work in Canada? Because I mean, basically the purpose of the vice president in America is really just to be like a failsafe should something happen to the president. The vice president presides over the Senate, casts the deciding vote when there's a tie, has a few other functions that they perform, but for the most part, it's a figurehead position, kind of like waiting in the wings should something happen to the president. The deputy prime minister is not the same thing. Like the deputy prime minister isn't there to step in and become prime minister should the prime minister resign or die or anything like that, or be incapacitated somehow.
Yeah, that's sort of it. I mean, it was a relatively new position that was just created in 1977 by Pierre Elliott Trudeau, Justin's father.
Interesting.
Yeah, I got to look a little bit more into the details of what this is, but yeah, it's certainly something. If the prime minister is incapacitated, the deputy prime minister would be carrying out his basic functions, but it's something that it's a little bit ambiguous as far as like what it is. So I'm not going to go into any detail because I don't know the details per se, except that it's a weird brand new institution.
But she doesn't immediately become prime minister just because he resigns. That's what you mean. Like that position has to be filled somehow. And it's not through an election. It sounds like it's through an appointment.
It was through an appointment. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
Interesting. And Canada, as you pointed out before, is a constitutional monarchy, right?
It's well, yeah, exactly. So that just simply means that it's a monarchy that has allowed for one of its colonies to have a constitution, but within the constitution is, as I've mentioned in previous episodes, the idea of rights, like where they come from, which is where you typically have a constitution that sort of declares the purpose, the mandate of the society, where its moral purpose comes from, where the rights are going to come from, and how they're going to be distributed. That are going to justify laws. In the case of any monarchy that has a constitution of as such, it's all the source of rights comes from the seat of the hereditary institution. Per se, that gives through the simple act of being a divinely ordained bloodline. That gives. It's called the fount of all honors. So it's the fountain, the source that springs out of, that all rights spring out of, and through their consent, the consent of the singular sovereign sitting on that throne at any given moment, they can give us the rights to their subjects, or implicitly, that's usually not written down because it looks bad, take them away. And anybody who's given special privileges, like let's say the Attorney General of the UK or a Commonwealth country, generally will wield the same authority of the crown. So the Governor General, an Attorney Governor, Attorney General, or whomever is a crown agent. And as a crown agent, it just means that you as an individual are an instrument of the crown. So the crown's authority passes through you, but you yourself are not subject to the law that you oversee. So just like the crown, the queen is the only person in the Commonwealth who has the license to kill. You know, she can't drive a car with a license. So the queen, or today the king, Charles III, doesn't need to drive by law his car carrying a license, because it's absurd in the mind of a British royalist, because the reason why you have a license that has any authority to be abided by a cop when you get pulled over or whatever is because the crown gave that authority to the driver of the license. So the crown is the authority. So just existing and having, living blood in your veins is adequate to just drive or kill or whomever. And you can't really be held responsible for anything that you do or don't do as far as crime is concerned. And then you can give that authority above the law to other people. Hence the free man on the land idea is you can grant free man privilege to the, as we saw it with the Magna Carta. That was the idea that the Norman Viking, new overlords, the feudal overlords, the robber barons said, well, we want the same privileges above the law as well. And they demanded it, they got it, and they created a new institution saying, okay, we can also, if we're free men, we don't pay tickets, we don't have to pay taxes, we don't have to abide by the laws that are only governed for the slaves, because we have this little. So they create all of these loopholes within the Magna Carta and within the British structures of weird common law based on precedent.
Yep. Well, and so what you're talking about is called the Divine Right of Kings. Mm-hmm. And the Divine Right of Kings was written in 1597 by King James VI. He's also King James I, because I think in Scotland he was considered King James VI. And in England, he was considered King James I. But he's the guy who merged the two kingdoms, basically created modern Britain by merging Scotland and England together. Those who've seen Braveheart will remember that William Wallace was fighting. He was a Scotsman fighting against the English who were trying to take over Scotland. And remember, the island of Britain, the northern half is Scotland, the southern half is England. Together, they are now known as Britain. Includes other nations such as Wales, parts of Ireland, and I think a small part of France. But yeah, so he created what's called the Divine Right of Kings, which is basically, he said that he's ordained by the people to be given the burden of government under God, but he's also accountable to the people and to God to do that in a righteous way. Interestingly enough, he's also the guy who, launched a lot of these companies, a lot of these because he took over after Queen Elizabeth died. I believe. Yeah, I think he took over for Queen Elizabeth. Queen Elizabeth, one of the last things she did was sign the charter for the East India Company in 1600. So all of these companies that we know about, the Virginia Company, the Muscovy Company, which is Russia, the Palestine Company, these were all basically incorporated expeditions to go explore the world. And we know, we've talked about the East India Company before and the nefarious hand it played in a lot of the things that have happened and how it ultimately transformed, in my opinion, at least, into British intelligence. But the divine right of kings comes from King James. It later is kind of like revisited in the 1600s by Louis XIV of France, who's known as the Sun King. He's the guy who built Versailles. He was the opulent, over the top, I'm going to cover everything in gold and just be, I am God's gift to earth, was his mentality. And so he kind of revisited that and said, not only am I ordained by the people to be the king of this nation, I am ordained by God to be the king of this nation. And therefore I am basically an extension of God. And that started what's called the age of absolutism, age of absolutism. Sorry. And that really took monarchy to the most extreme level, where the king was basically completely unaccountable and could just do whatever they wanted. And really ushered in kind of the most severe forms of tyranny as Europe saw. So the point is I've explained before on the show how what all that means is, the king real estate, which is an asset class in Europe, particularly Britain, real estate and the allocation of real estate by the king to his underlings is what created the hierarchy of political power. And basically by sucking up to the guy above you, placating him, paying the taxes that you're owed because of the land he bequeaths to you, that's how you maintain your title. If you do a really good job, maybe he gives you another title, and with more land comes more power, more troops, more resources, you expand your wealth. But the allocation of land to manage it is how the entire aristocracy basically developed, and how the whole idea of this nobility and this upper class, this second class, upper tier of citizenry forms.
Yeah.
Where America breaks from that was the idea of personal property and being able, the government doesn't bequeath to you the land. You own the land, and the government has no right to take it away from you, unless, of course, there's, prosecution and you've broken laws or whatever. But those laws have to be implemented by an elective legislature. And that's where we've seen, since the passage of the Constitution, we've seen that whole system corrupted. And now we pay taxes on property that basically you can own land for 100 years and still pay government taxes on it as if you are renting it from the government. It's total inversion of that entire system.
Right. Yeah. No, and part of the issue too is that if you were for many of these systems under hereditary power, you could only have the rights of a citizen if you owned land. And in that logic, if you didn't own the land, you couldn't have any type of electoral power. You didn't enjoy the rights of landowners. It was like this as well within different times during the Roman Empire. As far as who could have a say in who would vote for the Senate and who would not be allowed at all. So, I mean, part of the thing too is just in the American Revolution's case, there was the idea that even if you don't own land, you are still a full citizen, an equal in the eyes of God with full rights as a king would be. Everybody is sovereign, not just one sovereign, everybody, because you're born as a human. And because you're a human, you have certain qualities as when you're a baby, freshly made, right? Yes. And even if you're born to a poor family that doesn't own the land that they're plowing or whatever, it still means you could still vote. One vote, one that still counts. You can still participate. You still get all the privileges, the protections under the law. And that was a really revolutionary idea. Like nobody had really done that.
Totally revolutionary. Yep. Yeah. Because the age of absolutism and the idea of the divine right of kings, the rights that you have as a citizen under this king in his kingdom are bequeathed to you, just like the properties bequeathed to you. The king bequeaths to you these rights. So that's why everyone was beholden to the king, because you could have your rights taken away by the king and thrown in prison for no reason and kept indefinitely. And so the idea that the founding fathers came up with the Bill of Rights, which was written 2 years after the Constitution was written, as a separate document, and it was the rights that we have as humans are absolutely inalienable and are bequeathed to you by God the moment you are born, or even arguably before you're born. Just by merely existing, you have these rights, and those rights can never be taken away from you by any secular authority. And that's what the Bill of Rights is. The first 10 amendments, that's what they are supposed to represent.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, like we're now at a situation where Canada never really learned those lessons properly. We had moments, where we realized that we screwed up by not accepting the Benjamin Franklin Challenge. And, we had an effort in the 1830s to have these rebellions called the Upper and Lower Canada Rebellions against the British Empire to either join America as new states or to become our own republic with a special relationship with the United States below us. But it required the U.S. to be at that time in support of the Canadian revolutionaries under Louis-Joseph Papineau, in the case of French Canada, and his collaborator, William Lyon Mackenzie, who was a leader of Upper Canada that later came to be known as Ontario. And they jointly ran these rebellions, but these rebellions were not well organized, so they were undermined very quickly. You had infiltrators left and right, and so even though they were publishing the U.S. Constitution, they were publishing Thomas Paine's Common Sense, saying, "Look, we had a chance 50 years ago, we screwed up. Let's not." They required the U.S. to support them, which didn't happen. And at the time, I think you had Martin Van Buren, who had gotten power in Washington. And Van Buren actually passed a law. The guy was so loyal to the system of the British Empire that he passed an American law forbidding any Americans from supplying weapons, to supplying any type of logistics or support to the Canadian Republicans, which left them kind of out to hang. And even though you had a few renegade militia members from the United States, from Buffalo, from other states in the north, they went up to help out a little bit. It was messy, underdeveloped, disorganized, and it was undermined. So a lot of the leading Republicans were either killed in Canada or sent out to Australia to rot for like 20 years, and they came back kind of crippled. A few of them stayed behind and were able to sort of go into exile. Like William Lyon Mackenzie ran into exile in the United States, and he became a bit soft at that point. I don't know what happened to him. He was psyoped. There was still the push, like Louis-Joseph Papineau, after his exile, was able to rebuild his annexation movement and even put forth the Annexation Manifesto to say, look, Canada is suffering under the British Empire. We got to join the United States if we want economic development, if we want to survive. And he had a lot of supporters from French Canada. And it didn't, unfortunately, again, America wasn't right. They were still run by the Freemasonic Pierce administration, which is sort of the Freemasonic government of the 1853, 1854, 55 period. And like all of the leaders of the Confederacy, Jefferson Davis, Albert Pike, George Saunders, the guy who ran the Mazzini operations in the United States, the Young America operations, that guy who was the consul to London and hosted Mazzini and Palmerston salons in London, organizing these anarcho-terrorist groupings in Europe and in the USA and in Canada. He was part of the Pierce administration, so there was no collaboration that Papineau was able to get a second time that he tried, and the U.S. was just accelerated towards destroying itself from within by its enemies from London that were organizing these different branches of the Scottish Rite in the north and in the south that were like just saying, okay, let's just undo the Constitution. I mean, I went through a little bit of this in some detail last week, but yeah, Canada, every time we've come close to sort of learning the lessons of what a real natural law looks like, it's been sabotaged. So now we're coming to another lesson yet again.
Yep.
And I think that there's a bit of a hectic race over who's going to influence. Trump has, I think, done quite a bit to force this conversation, to force this national crisis. And some people think that they could take control of it and, revive the idea of a bad idea of a North American Union and a technate that I saw you just pushed something or published something on your channel this morning on that topic. And then you got patriots who are also thinking, hey, we could take control of this and use it towards the good. So I think there's a fight over North American power structure right now that's not come into being yet.
That's where I want to pivot to. But before we do, let's we just got a big rumble rant from Angry Elf 6411, and they asked a great question. I think we can use this to pivot to where what you just said. $150. Angry Elf, thank you so much. Very generous of you. Hey fellas, first, I love this show and rarely get to see you live. Second, happy new freedom year. Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year.
Third, can you suggest any sites or books with true and honest history of the U.S.? I'm going to kick it to you to answer that question. But first, I will just say, after you answer, I have something to say. But I would say go read the original writings of the people who founded this country, like starting like in 1750 and go to like 1790. Maybe even 1800. Just go find like source documents, the actual writings of, the anti-federalist papers, the federalist papers, the stuff Thomas Paine was putting out years before the revolution. I mean, go learn about what they were saying in their own words, because I think that empowers you when you know what the people are actually thought. Like, go read what George Washington had to say, like what he was writing. Because then I think that empowers you when you hear other people talking about them. If they're not presenting an accurate picture of what the person thought, like what they were writing in their personal letters or their personal writings, then, maybe that person hasn't done as much research as they claim to have, and maybe they're not reading the source documents. And it empowers you to kind of like make up your own mind as you're consuming information as to the accuracy of it all, right? So I feel like the source documents, especially from that period, because the guys who did that, they were all born this like 1720s, 1730s, 1740s. That was during what's known as the Great Awakening. That was when, 1700, there was Britain and America were pretty degenerate places. Their culture had really declined. There was a lot of crime. There was a lot of immorality. And then basically there was like a authentic Christian revival where people went back to kind of first principles and seeking, real truth as opposed to something that was, psyoped onto them. There were 3 subsequent Great Awakenings after that. I think right now we're living through either the 4th or 5th, quote unquote, Great Awakening. In my opinion, having looked into the ones that came later, I think all of those were like psychological warfare operations to subvert and destroy something authentic. So that's just my opinion, but that's what it seems to me. Because you had some stuff come out of those movements that has not served the interest, I think, of humanity. Ultimately, I think it's divided people up, and it's certainly in the latter 1800s leaned into more of like the occult kind of stuff happening in London. So, but anyway, I would kick it to you. What sites or books? It's so hard to suggest a specific site or a book because you don't want to, point to a very specific place. You kind of want to. Anyway, I digress. What do you think?
Yeah, that was a very diplomatic set of wordings that you selected for the Great Awakenings, and I share your trepidation about some of those, which were very much tied to a cult, typically British occult hellfire connected operations that were penetrating the U.S. and seeding pseudo-Christian movements that were channeling, invoking necromancy and other things that are typically not really approved under authentic Christian philosophy into the young Americas. The burnt over district of northern New York was a great example of that. Just burnt over with the religious fervor of revivalism and stuff, where people were just going into tongues, going to epileptic seizures. And you had a lot of those who were overseeing that from the top who were tied to, hardcore Freemasonic circles who were not Christian at all. They were doing their own thing and trying to nudge America into a very, very bad place. So, yeah, I totally endorse that. And let this I think we'll just take a moment here. I'll chime in with my 2 cents. For anybody listening, if they want to completely become little maestros of the show's composition, throw in $150. And yeah, sure, we'll accommodate. We'll
Talk
accommodate
about whatever you want.
yeah, we'll hit pause. So yeah, no, that's a great question. For my part, what I found on top of the original writings, if you can acquire as many of the writings, pay what you got to pay. If you got the means to do it, get them. If you could download them from archive.org, get them, but get the original writings, like you said, of people who made history, read what they were saying, their letters, their transcribed speeches, if they're available. I've tried to do that the best we can, my wife and I, by, we got the collected writings of Abraham Lincoln, of Benjamin Franklin. Every time we can get something like that, we pick it up. The other thing, though, for really high quality historians who I found were of the greatest value in my research, who provided content that I was able to put into practice in my own digging, that I cherish. I'm going to throw I pulled a few books off my bookshelf just to show people these things. And if you can buy them. If you can find them online under archive.org, again, find them that way. I would say number 1 is How the Nation Was Won, America's Untold Story from 1630 to 1754, by Graham Lowry. This book is, for me, like one of the most valued treasures I have. And it goes through the earliest days of the Massachusetts Bay Colony and connects the American Revolution as a self-conscious conspiracy to make that happen, that took many generations to build the fertile cultural soil in which the impossible could be possible. And it was very, very, those who were setting up the original founding colonies were very self-aware. And I would even say some of those people who were working with Shakespeare in setting up the Virginia Company, when Shakespeare was still like writing and performing, and a lot of what he was doing with Caliban and The Tempest, a lot of his stories about, seeking the brave new world that have been so misused by Aldous Huxley and the social engineers were actually based upon an idea of challenging the imagination, the moral imagination of Europeans who were sitting under the rot of forever wars of empire politics, to think about breaking free and trying to set up a new civilization far removed from the rot and corruption of the old patrician class of oligarchs, which was what the people like John Winthrop were self-aware in doing. So that book is great. I would also say Anton Chaikin's Treason in America is 1984. It was published, but there's been many editions since. It's called From Aaron Burr to Averell Harriman. And this goes through, I found, one of the most essential documents of the growth of America's deep state. And it also has a few sections on the Second Great Awakening that are pretty wild. Several chapters on that, as far as a very evil Hellfire Club operation. Even after the Hellfire Club changed its name and did something different in 1790, it continued in a variety of ways. So this book goes through a lot of that, leading up to World War II. And the third one I'll just say is Dope Inc. Dope Incorporated, the book that drove Kissinger crazy, which also does a deep dive into the origins of the Hofjuden, the court Jews, the Pharaoh's Jews that were the bankers of the empire, going back to the days of the Jewish captivity in Babylon, and the origins of the Kabbalah, and how that translated over into the Roman Empire and into the emergence of the Crusades with the Hofjuden, that were able to do the sort of dirty mercenary financial work that the nominally Christian leaders were not going to do openly, but they needed that to be done. So they really groomed this treacherous satanic faction that were nominally Jewish, but not really, as you and I have discussed, the skin suit idea.
Mystics, right? Mystics.
Well, yeah, there might have been some moral mystics out there, but yeah, these were like very, very a particular brand of mystics that had a cosmology of an evil god that made us in its image.
By mystics, I mean people who believe in the idea that the laws of nature are like magic, like the idea that you can wield the power of nature, like the power of God exists in every little inanimate object, and you can tap into it, extract it, and then wield that magic and like for yourself, and basically become like a god yourself with enough practice.
That's right. With enough rituals and willpower, you can will your own, like, exactly. That your willpower, that Nietzschean will to power, what Aleister Crowley called thelema, is that's all based on my ability to impose my will and have the demonic forces that are embedded in everything pantheistically within the universe will start abiding by my will to whatever serve me in whatever egotistical
speak to deities, and they'll give you the knowledge you need. Like tap into that, like speak to these entities from other dimensions. That's where you get like blood magic. That's where you get the idea of sex magic, that, which I think those words I think are going to resonate with people who are just familiar with the stuff going on in Hollywood right now, and the stuff you're seeing in Hollywood. Occult. I mean, it's all very occult, and it's very, very dark. And, I think that there is actually one more book before we keep going that I would actually recommend now that we're recommending books. This book, Daniel Defoe's. Have you ever read this book? A general.
I love Daniel Defoe.
Do you?
Defoe and The Plague Year. Yeah, I love him.
Oh man, you should read this book. So like when I was in college, I did. I was a history major. And they, at my school, it was a small school. There were a lot of history majors at my school. It was a liberal arts school. And basically you were like an econ major or you were a history major. And then there were like a handful of science majors, but our science department was pretty pathetic at my school. So the history majors would like go to law school and the econ majors would go to business school. And I did neither one. I went to architecture school. But when it came time to pick a thesis, the two options traditionally were always the French Revolution, or then I forget which one it was, but something with the Middle East. It was something with the Middle East. And I was so exhausted about like the Middle East by this is like 2009, that I just like, I definitely don't want to do the Middle East because I have so much fatigue from like all the psyops and the news about 9/11, that I don't want to do the Middle East. I had no interest in the Middle East, which a lot of people would be surprised to hear that, but that didn't come till later. And the French Revolution, I was like, French Revolution. There was no like American Revolution offering or anything. Those were two options. And then like the courses you would take for your thesis. And then this professor started like my senior year, this new course offering on pirates, on the history of piracy. And I was like, all right, well, that's different. Like that could be interesting. And so I took it kind of like not knowing what I was getting myself into. And we read these books. This is like one of the main books we read. But what I learned so much about pirates. It was like an emerging field at the time of history. Basically, these guys on these ships, they would get on these ships, the most democratic body out there. They had written laws. Like all these pirate ships had written laws. They were very, very heavily enforced. A lot of like the cliches you hear about them being like crazy and insane. It's like that happened a little bit. But for the most part, they had very strict laws. And the guys who were elected captain, you were only captain as long as you were capable. And then as soon as you like stopped being capable, most of the time they would just be removed by a vote. Like they wouldn't be like a violent mutiny. It would just be like, all right, well, we're going to have a vote now. We no longer back you because you're not leading us to any success. New captain. And, the really charismatic guys would become tyrants and become like real captains. And then they could control multiple ships. But remember, pirates all started. The origin of pirates was the Portuguese and the Spanish discovered America in 1492. The Portuguese discovered an enormous coastline in the southern hemisphere. The Spanish discovered a few islands in the Caribbean. And they were both Catholic nations. And so to avoid going to war with one another, they went to the Pope and they said, hey, and the Pope was like, I don't want y'all to kill each other because you're my two nations. Like I can't have you, France is kind of like teetering on Catholicism and Protestantism, but I really can't lose y'all, the Iberian Peninsula. So how about this? We're going to take the map. We're going to draw a line down the middle, the Treaty of Tordesillas. Everything on the east belongs to Portugal. Everything on the west belongs to Spain. Everyone thought Portugal was getting the best deal and Spain was getting screwed. Turns out the line was right in the middle of Brazil, which is why in Brazil they speak Portuguese, and everywhere else they speak Spanish. So Spain got the gold in Mexico, they got the silver in Peru. Brazil, doesn't really have a lot, but other than the Amazon, which is why Portugal, which at the time was the big maritime power in the 1400s, they start to decline because they didn't really have anything. Spain then explodes, becomes an enormous superpower because of all the gold they found in Mexico. And so England, France, the Netherlands, Portugal eventually, they're like, these enormous treasure galleons, these armadas are moving across the Atlantic Ocean to bring all this gold back to Spain. And they're like, dude, we want a piece of that. So they start commissioning their naval captains to hide out in these islands in the Caribbean, but also the Canary Islands up near Africa and Europe, and attack these ships and take the gold. And they were called, you get a letter of marque, which is you'd be commissioned as a privateer. And so these were trained Navy men. The first pirates were trained Navy men who were basically given permission to just go off on their own, act with autonomy, and do whatever they could to steal gold and silver from these ships. And then eventually the captains of these ships got sick and tired of answering to the people back home. And so they were like, well, look at all this gold. Like, why do I need to bring the gold back to Europe? I'm just going to take the gold and go live like a king somewhere in the world, somewhere in the Caribbean. And that's where the whole idea of like Pirates of the Caribbean comes from. Now, a lot of these guys were also double dipping. They were, John Morgan was the governor of Jamaica. He was also a pirate king. So it's like these guys like were in bed with Edward Teach, Blackbeard. He was in bed with a lot of the British colonial powers in America. But the point, so you had a lot of like that mixture of like clandestine, nefarious operation with the British hand in there. So the point is that these pirate ships were, I actually think now looking back on it all, that the autonomy that these guys learned and the democracy that these guys learned on these pirate ships, coupled with the self-reliance that was forming in the Americas, these people moving to the wilderness to cultivate and build the society on their own with no help, no direct help from Britain other than just correspondence that took 3 months to go back and forth. That's really what formed like the American identity and the idea of like, we can do this without some king 3,000 miles away telling us what to do. So I would encourage people to go read these stories. They're interesting. You'll learn some things about some of these pirates. Some of them were insane. Like Blackbeard used to use psychological warfare. He would tie cannon fuses into his beard and light them on fire when he would go into battle. So his beard would literally be on fire. And he would use like psychological warfare to scare the crap out of the other the people he was boarding, so they would immediately surrender and not want to fight. And then he would always let somebody live and send them out to tell stories of what he did to the rest of the crew, to kind of build the legend around himself. So like stuff like that. I mean, it's really interesting when you like start digging into some of that stuff and how and Defoe does a great job of explaining it. So it's great that you were already a Defoe fan. I'm sorry for the long tirade, but
dude, this is great. I took it. I'm going to buy that book. And because Defoe actually, he came on my radar. I obviously everyone knows of the story of Robinson Crusoe, which is fantastic. But it was only when I was looking into the battle against the Bank of England being set up in, as you had the Lord Marlborough faction that's Winston Churchill's great grandfather, who was in charge, not in charge, but he was a very top official within the Venetian party, the junto of England, that was overseeing the Dutch William of Orange takeover in 1688, and he became the minister of war. A super corrupt guy, always vying for creating a new war with Spain or with France, mostly France, but at the time Spain too. No, mostly France at that time. But and he's just a big war profiteer. But I was looking into, again, through the works of Graham Lowry in this particular book right here, who were the Republican resistance fighting against this takeover that was organized by these Venetian grand strategists that had already taken control of the Dutch sort of government. They set up the Dutch Stock Exchange. They set up the Dutch East India Company earlier on, like 80 years earlier. So that takeover had been infiltrating for a long time, building up the shadow government that became the government of the Netherlands, that crushed the Habsburg Republican resistance of, the revolt, the Flanders rebellions, all of these like really strong rebellions that were really concentrated within the scientific and artistic culture of the Netherlands. It was quite astounding. The engineering, moral culture was like nothing that anybody had ever seen. The literacy was astounding. The discoveries in science, optics, Christian Huygens' work on optics, Rembrandt, his family came out of this Republican sort of culture that had built its identity around, again, the resistance against Habsburg tyranny of the Spanish Empire. And that had to be destroyed because it was spreading. It was catching on. Other people were getting the same kind of ideas that we could also resist and stand up to tyranny.
Mm-hmm.
And they do that the way they always do, is if you can't destroy it physically from without, you infiltrate it and corrupt it from within. That's what they did with the case of Amsterdam, turning it into increasingly a speculative money bag, where they had the Dutch tulip bubble built in to just make money out of tulips. You're not building anything, you're creating corruption. And so when that was done sufficiently, the Venetians had destroyed that movement in the Netherlands. Then they used their assets to then go and take control of their key target, which was England. And that was the Glorious Revolution. Now, who was fighting against the installation of this private central bank modeled on the Bank of Amsterdam, which was the Bank of England inside of the city? It was Robert Harley. And Harley was the prime minister. He was like one of these. He's kind of like, he reminds me a little bit of a Trump character, able to just sort of like walk in all worlds, like really just, gain people's trust and then pull the rug out from under their feet. Sometimes he compromised too much and screwed things up, but overall he was like a pretty solid guy. It took him like 20 years to end up taking this guy down and put him in the Tower of London, but he was prime minister for a sustained period. And his advisors were Jonathan Swift, the guy who wrote A Modest Proposal and Gulliver's Travels, was one of his key advisors. The other guy was Daniel Defoe, who he commissioned to write the draft for the National Land Bank in 1696. So Daniel Defoe wrote the program of how to destroy the Bank of England right at its inception and replace it with an actual authentic national bank. That Defoe goes into how you're going to fund schools, canals, public works, defense, in ways that the Bank of England could never do and would never do. So that's how I was like, who's this Daniel Defoe? And I started like reading more of his literature, and I started realizing that what he was doing with his Robinson Crusoe was really the same kind of thing that Benjamin Franklin was doing with his Poor Richard's Almanac and his publishing house, which was creating stories that had these strong, deep, moral, transformative values embedded within the story to create a society of sovereign citizens who could understand the deeper ideas about justice, liberty, that the society that was peasant with a peasant lifestyle could not understand at the time. So they had to intervene and uplift the culture. Benjamin Franklin was also doing that through science and his works on popularizing science for the masses, through his work on electricity and other things. But it was all tied together. The science fight, the artistic fight, was all based on creating a culture of citizens who could know how their divine powers of creative reason worked, as well as their responsibilities and to their future, unborn children, which goes together very closely in the fight for emancipation politically. So yeah, that was my introduction. But this whole idea of Defoe as an authority on the history of piracy and that's fascinating. I had no idea.
Yeah. And I mean, what you just said is amazing, because it's almost like storytelling creates culture. Storytelling has the power to psychologically change, like start a new human epoch. I mean, that is the essence of what like Burning Bright has always talked about, is the power of storytelling and the power of a source. And that's also, the inspiration behind my new show, is trying to use storytelling to help kind of define what we're witnessing right now and organize it into something that's more comprehensible. I will real quick, just to indulge us a little further. One of the things I read about in my thesis, it was like a 32-page thesis. It was way too long, but I talked about Christopher Columbus and how there was a little bit of like piracy going on with what he was doing. This is his fourth voyage. And so his fourth voyage, they kind of go down and they finally discover like a coastline. And he's actually like bedridden, sick for most of the voyage. I think they built a garrison down here in Panama. They built a fort, and they tried to establish like a base for exploration. And then they were attacked by a bunch of Indians, and they had to abandon one of the ships. And the other ship that they escaped in was full of like worms and was sinking, so they had to book it back home. But for most of the voyage, he was very sick and in bed. His brother was in charge of everything, and somewhere like right here in Central America, like around the Bay Islands, I think there's this passage from his brother's journal. Actually, I think it might be Christopher Columbus's journal, but he was like delirious when he was writing it, so it wasn't like very accurate. It wasn't detailed, but there is a brief description that I found that I was like, this is fascinating. This would have been, between 1502 and 1504. And they described coming across an enormous canoe that had like 50 people on it. Because remember, at the time, they didn't know the Mayans existed. They didn't know the Aztec existed. Every society they had come across on these islands were super primitive. Like they could literally trade, like a mirror for like everything a village had, because these people were so primitive that just the idea of articulated jewelry, like, astounded them. But then all of a sudden they come across this enormous canoe that's like that has 50 people on it. Everyone is like highly ornate, like decoratively dressed. They have jade jewelry attached to their nose, which was something the Mayans did. They had all this really fancy, highly articulated jade jewelry, nothing like they had ever seen before. The ship that they were on was very, very well crafted with a high level of craftsmanship. They traded what they could. They didn't really have much left at that time, but they traded what they could to have a few artifacts to take back. But they went home and told everyone, we found something like this ship that we came across. We don't know where the ship came from, but it definitely didn't come from any society we ever came across. And that ended up being the Mayans, who were over here in the Yucatan Peninsula. But they also down here in Panama came across, they described all of the, it was very popular for the natives to run around with like little fanny packs made out of leaves. And the fanny packs were full of a white powder that they would constantly like brush in their teeth, cocaine. And it gave them, and it made them run very, very fast through the woods. This is actually like what they were writing in their journal. Fascinating stuff. But the last thing I'll say on this, and then we can get off the pirate stuff, is I mentioned John Morgan. Captain Morgan's rum is like what, that's the guy from Captain Morgan's rum, which is obviously like a commercialized brand, but real person, or I'm not John Morgan, Henry Morgan, not Henry Morgan was the governor of Jamaica. And there is a story, because I also read about him. There is a story of him trying to invade Colombia on behalf of the British government using pirates. So he went and recruited like hundreds of pirates, and they went to with cannons and, with British backing, went to go invade Colombia. And the Colombian Indians in this battle that's described rounded up 2,000 bulls and unleashed the bulls across the battlefield. And the bulls basically stampeded all the pirates and defeated Henry Morgan's army, because I thought that was kind of cool that there was a battle between Indians and pirates, and the Indians won by using 2,000 bulls, like a running of the bulls episode.
How many cliches in one thing? No, that's hilarious. I mean, that's the stuff. Somebody should make a movie about that.
Yeah. So you could make a movie from the stuff that Defoe writes about. So it's
absolutely. But was there ever any discussion about? Because I know I haven't done the work on pirates per se as you have, but does Defoe, or did you in your research look into? I know that there seems to be some connection between the Templar control over maritime shipping routes during the Crusades, and somehow the skull and crossbones seems to find its origin as a symbol within the Templars before they got taken down. Did you find any connection to that as well?
I'm sure there was. This would have been like I graduated in 2010, so I was working on this in 2009, 2010, this thesis. I didn't really wake up, so to speak, until 2012 and learn about that stuff. My teacher though was this chick who was everyone would joke around that she was like a vampire. Like she would her office was like down in the basement where there were no windows. She would use candles in her office instead of like lights. She had like very pale skin. She was a beautiful woman, but like she always wore like the same black suit. And so when she would start talking about any of that kind of stuff, I kind of be like, it would make me a little uncomfortable because I felt like she was like almost preaching a little bit. She was very, very nice lady, but it was, I don't know. I know she talked about the skull and crossbones at some point because I think she was into that kind of stuff. She had like skulls like in her office. But no, I personally never found that connection. I'm sure it exists though. That would be a fascinating dive. So yeah, I had some real characters in college, like as my professors. I had another guy. My main history professor was a Korean War vet who like served in Korea and just a total battle axe. And Russian history was his thing. He was obsessed with Russia. It was like a love-hate thing. Like he loved Russian history and he loved Russia. He thought it was the most tragic history of all time. That's what he told us. And he was like obsessive about learning the geography. He would give in every class, every Russian history class, he would give you a week to study, and then he would give you a quiz. And if you didn't get, I think it was like a 90, it was like a map with a word bank, and you had to match the word bank to all the rivers and the cities in Russia. And it was like, if you didn't get a 90%, he would immediately fail you and you had to drop the class.
Whoa.
Because he was like, if you don't know the geography, then why are you coming to my class? He was just but he was a battle axe and a great history professor. He taught me a lot about Russian history. So anyway, I digress, but we've really gotten off subject here. I think let's hit the next ad, do a reset, and then come back and talk about Canada some more.
Oh, okay. Yeah, let's do that. I also got okay. So let me just pull up the ad number 2, which is somewhere in this massive list of videos. Here it is. Safe Streets. That's what it is. Safe Streets. So let me just read that. Badlanders, imagine this. You're getting the peace of mind of an ADT smart home security system valued at $850 and a Google Nest doorbell camera to keep tabs on who's lurking around your porch, all for free, with a new ADT monitoring service. As a cherry on top, you'll snag a $100 Visa gift card. Yes, you heard that right, for free. Here's what you got to do. Head over to the getsafestreets.com/badlands, submit your information, or call 925-529-6541. That's 925-529-6541. And start living like you're in a sci-fi movie where your house is smarter than most people you meet at parties. Don't miss out on this deal. It's like finding the galaxy's best bargain bin. Think about it. With this setup, you'll never again have to guess if the creak you heard was just your house settling or something else more intriguing. And that $100 Visa gift card, that's your reward for being smart enough to listen to this podcast. So grab this. They're fun. So grab this offer before it vanishes into the ether. Secure your home with Safe Streets, the most trusted name in home security. Currently, they have over 106,000 reviews on Trustpilot, and they're sitting pretty well with a 4.9 star rating. That's not luck, that's skill. Get safestreets.com/badlands or call 925-529-6541. All right. That was a new one. Okay.
Yeah. So let's talk about the technocracy stuff, the angle on the Canada stuff, because Trump has been, let me see if I can find it. Trump has been pushing this. The interesting part about the timing of Trudeau's resignation is the focus that Trump has given to Canada in the weeks leading up to it, where he's been talking about, he was talking about Canada becoming the 51st state before Trudeau resigned. He was talking about, he was being very condescending towards Trudeau and just towards like the Canadian government and everything that they've done nefariously in recent history, and speaking negatively on it before this all happened. Yeah. Trudeau then goes to Mar-a-Lago and kind of totally bends the knee to Trump. And it ostensibly looks like there are a lot of people who thought that Trudeau was being brought into the fold and basically maybe Trudeau's not a bad guy because it looks like he's going to work with Trump, but now he's resigning. And, maybe that's a surrender. Maybe that's what Trudeau. I mean, assuming he actually does resign and he's gone. Fidel Castro's son might actually be leaving the soap opera for good. I mean, who knows? But the interesting part is Trump. It feels to me like he's being provocative. Like he's on purpose. He's trying. This is like Kevin McAllister in Home Alone, mocking and teasing, antagonizing the wet bandits. Like where it's like, I'm up here, your horse's ass. Like, when he posts the stuff. Like the AI generated meme of him on the mountaintop with the American flag or the Canadian flag and him talking about it becoming the 51st state. It feels like that is directed towards somebody and he is trying to be antagonistic and he's trying to get somebody worked up. And who that is on the receiving end, I would be curious to know. But again, we go back to the idea of Canada being under the British monarchy and, the overarching thesis that you and Cynthia have, which I think has all the merit in the world, about London being at the very center of all this stuff, and the history of London and a lot of the occult stuff that people have come to associate with the bad elements of our government being centered in London, drawing an origin story to London, and then other places too before that. It just makes me wonder if that's what he's doing. There are a lot of people right now who I guess have long claimed to be Trump supporters, have been pro-Trump, who are now talking about Trump basically selling us out. And they're like, oh, he's doing the whatever Agenda 2030 thing where the technocrats wanted to create this region of control in North America, where North America would be under one technocratic control group, and then Europe is another one, Africa is another one, Australia is another one, so on and so forth. Which again, and I think in that map, it's Greenland, Canada, and America is one control region, and then Mexico, Central America, and South America is another.
It's like here. I've got it in my latest thing. So it's like that. I showed this last week in my show as a word of caution to what
yeah, that's it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's some bad actors who I think are probably looking in that direction to revive that idea that, as you pointed out in your latest post, Elon Musk's grandpa was a big champion of that when he was overseeing the Technocracy Inc.
Chris Paul pointed that out. I was just reposting Chris with my own commentary. Chris Paul pointed out that it was Elon Musk's grandfather who was into this stuff.
Oh, I see. Yeah. So that's basically from their 1933 Bible, the Technocracy Bible, which called for this Technate of the Americas run by proto-Silicon Valley social engineers that would cause the what was it called? They put forth this idea of a Soviet of engineers that would cause society's industry to grind to a halt, to reset the economy, and then to create a new technocracy controlled system that politicians and the business class would be erased, and a new sort of set of scientific engineers would be created. So that was what I think created Silicon Valley after World War II, because this thing was shut down. It was too fascist. Elon Musk's grandfather was put in jail for being on the wrong side of World War II. And when he got out, that's when he sort of became the leader of the Social Credit Party of Saskatchewan, ran for office, didn't work. The head of the Social Credit Party was writing letters to Hitler because Hitler was looking at that being the basis of an anarcho-syndicalist sort of new system if Hitler would win World War II. That's likely what he would have adopted. And then when that didn't work and he couldn't get power, then he went to South Africa and built up his thing. And his daughter became Mae Musk, after she married Errol. But all I have to say, I think that there's some bad people that want to revive that idea. But I think also the idea of not centralizing, but to take a power structure that represents and can organize the resources and economy of all of that area of North America is not intrinsically a bad thing either. It could be a good thing if it's done for the right reasons, which is where I was trying to, last week, get across that you've got a viable argument that could be made that I think Trump would lean towards, which is what I'm hoping he can stay. The Patriot movement can stay in control of what this is. If this is something that they're even going in, because I think in Canada's case, if you look at what's controlling what created Justin Trudeau. I outlined this in my newest post, and it's a lot of this content is developed in my Untold History of Canada book series. It's 4 volumes, and there's this think tank that was created in 2006 called Canada 2020, and these are the founders of it. And here on the left is this guy John Manley. They're all privy councillors. Bob Ray, who's a Rhodes Scholar, who also sort of was a handler of Chrystia Freeland. He gave his seat over when Chrystia was brought from being a George Soros journalist into politics. It was his riding. He basically abdicated to give the space over to her. He was also an interim leader of the Liberal Party for a period as well some years ago. Then you got this woman here, Anne McClellan. She's a cyberneticist, very, very high-level cyberneticist within the Canada Civil Service and the Club of Rome connected operations. This guy here, Bill Graham, was in charge of the Canadian. There's a Canadian version of the Council on Foreign Relations. It's called the Canada International Council. It's the sort of subsidiary of the British-controlled Chatham House, or the Royal Institute for International Affairs, which also controls the CFR. It's run by the Rhodes Trust, the same Rhodes Scholarship operation. So he was the president of that for a period, and this guy here was Pierre Elliott Trudeau's personal secretary, Thomas Axworthy. And so all of these guys, along with another woman by the name of Diane Carney, Mark Carney's wife, were the founders of this Canada 2020 thing in 2006. And this is where they sort of arranged a reorganization of the Liberal Party, because if you go back to 2003, 2004, the Liberal Party under Jean Chrétien, he was this sort of old school politician who was the Prime Minister of Canada for a period. He was good friends with Putin. He actually got the Friend of Russia award in 2014 by Putin directly, because he's like, again, the old school Donald Trump style politician looking for, like, business relationships, recognizing that World War III is bad for business. So he sort of set the tempo for what the Liberal Party was. They were much more inclined towards supporting industrial cooperation, things like that. And that got changed. And that was a real coup d'etat run by these technocrats who just did a massive party purge overseen by Canada 2020. And they just took down everybody who was allied philosophically to the Jean Chrétien method, were destroyed. And then after a period of sort of purging and just real cleansing of the party, they came out of it back into power after Stephen Harper, who was a conservative leader of Canada from, I think, 2007 till 2014. When he was removed, earlier, but the Conservatives, when they were finally removed from power, then the New Liberals under Justin Trudeau.
That's when Trudeau came in, right? Like 2014. I feel like that's around the time that he came in.
Yeah, he was made a politician officially at the end of 2012.
Okay.
And I wrote an article published at the Canadian Patriot on that I republished here on called "What Does the Empire Have?" Here, this is actually the article that I just screenshot from my old copy in 2012. Is "What Does the Empire Have Planned for Poor Justin Trudeau?" in 2012, where I just go through the Bilderberger group and all of the handlers of this. Clearly, even then, it could be seen when you know that he's a synthetic cardboard cutout, and they originally were marketing him in 2006 at this Canada 2020 founding conference. And, he was just this scandal-ridden high school teacher who couldn't keep a job, walking in sandals, rich kid's silver spoon. And it was a disaster. But the idea was that it was going to take them a few years to figure out how do you groom this guy to be publicly sellable to Canadians, because, again, he was just such a mess. And so they did the job. They worked him to make him finally kind of consumable, which they did in 2012. And he was made prime minister in 2015. Here, let me just end this thing for a second. And then you had, let me just do I said stop share. I can't stop my share anyway at this stage. And this Canada 2020 think tank, they brought in Obama into Canada, and many times Larry Summers, all of the behaviorists that came into it with Obama were all brought into Canada as well. So they were sort of co-organizing the behaviorist takeover of America at the same time. In fact, I would even say that Canada was the operation of the shadow government within Canada's Privy Council was probably leading in many ways the takeover of the American state below us. I think Canada more often than not is not the follower, but rather the leader of what the bad things that happen to the United States, and that's a bit of a psyop to say that Canada is the victim of America's abuses. I think it's the opposite.
What's interesting about that is like what Trump said. I guess it was yesterday he did his press conference. Or it was either yesterday or Monday. I can't remember. But that's basically what Trump was saying. Trump was like, why? He's like, we spend hundreds of billions of dollars a year to defend Canada. What do we get out of it? And he's like, we get nothing out of it. 25% of our cars are made in Canada. He's like, why are they made in Canada? Why aren't they made in Michigan? There's a lot of signal, I think, in what Trump's doing. Mm-hmm. But I think what he does is he kind of, and this is going back to 2015. He's always been really, really good at using deploying distractions to get people focused on shiny objects while he's also putting out signal. So the thing where he says we're going to change the name of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. That's a silly kind of thing that became kind of a meme and people were focused on. At the end of the day, how does that improve anybody's life? It doesn't. It's now you could argue there's a psychological component to it if it actually happens. I'm not convinced that it will. But I feel like he does stuff like that to get people talking about the things that he wants them talking about. So when he talks about Greenland, for example, and buying Greenland from the Danish or from Denmark.
Yeah, the Danish.
Yeah, from the Danish. Also with Canada, the stuff that he really talks about is the natural resources there that are not being tapped into and utilized. He's like, there are vast natural resources in both Greenland and Canada that are not being used. Why are we not allowed to access those natural resources? It's the same thing he did with America during the first term. There's been a psyop to make everyone think that we have to go to the Middle East and we have to rely on the Middle East for oil. And Pepe Escobar has done a great job explaining over the years, the whole pipeline wars that have driven our involvement in the Middle East, particularly Afghanistan. All of that was predicated on trying to make sure that we control the geography between India and China, China, that sector of Asia, Russia, and Europe, and making and that geography all comes together at Afghanistan, and it's the maps of the pipelines all going through Afghanistan are fascinating. But what Trump proved is that we don't need any of them for oil. We can not only can we produce enough oil for ourselves, we can become the leader of oil production in the world just based on the stuff we have here. Why have we never tapped into that? And those are questions that people should be asking. They should be talking about it. And the answer ultimately leads you back into the nefarious people who have been controlling the Canadian government and the US government. And that's a long-winded way of addressing what you just said, because think about what we talked about, I think, last week or the week before with Kanye West and, or it was weeks back, that guy, Harley Pasternak. Yeah, the guy who's become the guy in Hollywood. He's the personal trainer, and everyone, all these A-list celebrities are all like, "Oh, I got to check with my trainer before I can answer that question." Or they're never like, "I got to check with my agent, I got to check with my lawyer, I got to check with whoever." They're always like, "I have to check with my personal trainer, Harley Pasternak." And it turns out this guy is ex-Canadian intelligence, and he specialized in neurotropic drugs, which Kanye West described as lithium, being given to him in order to control his mind by Harley Pasternak. So when you talk about Five Eyes, you talk about the collaboration between, which is another thing people are talking about right now, the collaboration between the CIA, British intelligence, Canadian intelligence, Australia, New Zealand, and Harley Pasternak coming down and controlling celebrities in LA. I mean, that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and you got to think about too, in the whole MK Ultra operation. Ewan Cameron, who was a Montreal-based Allen Memorial Institute Tavistock psychiatrist. He's British, but he was based in Montreal. He was an overseer with Sidney Gottlieb, but he oversaw, I think, more things than people realize over MK Ultra from Canada. You had the introduction of Hoffman, who was bringing in a lot of the LSD operations into and Hoffman and Aldous Huxley representing the British Empire, operating through Vancouver, who were bringing in a lot of the drugs, the LSD, other things into the U.S. pharmaceutical complex that was run by the CIA. The Agape Lodge of Satanists that were running the OTO, the Ordo Templi Orientis penetration of the U.S. culture, especially in Hollywood. That was the Hollywood branch that people tend to know so much about, which was run by Jack Parsons, and a bunch of Satanists who ended up infiltrating the Manhattan Project, or even running it at its origin. And also L. Ron Hubbard was sort of a lieutenant at that satanic grouping at the Agape Lodge that Aleister Crowley founded in California. That was Agape Lodge number 2. Agape Lodge number 1 was in Vancouver, Canada. That was the first Agape, like the Mother Lodge that was created by Crowley first. So you had Canada's always there. I mean, the murder of Lincoln through Canada, directed by Confederate operations that were built up with British help in Montreal and Toronto. That's what murdered Lincoln. That's what the banking system in Bay Street was very much always the direct controlled British hand, whereas the Wall Street banks often had to abide by American laws and couldn't be their treacherous self all the time. Most of the time they were, but sometimes they had to abide by American constitutional laws, whereas in Canada, they were always able to carry out economic warfare to subvert the U.S. dollar at different times. So yeah, JFK's murder as well was run from Canada by Permindex, the assassination bureau. So yeah, Canada is definitely underappreciated as far as nefarious operations. So if Trump is able to get a handle on that, okay.
Yeah. Well, it's fascinating. You just mentioned the Manhattan Project and the Satanists infiltrating that. So you remember this guy who was killed a few weeks ago, the Russian general we talked about. Well, we played the video, I think, on this show. Here's the quote from when he testified 2 years ago in public. It was, I guess, the Russian parliament, maybe. He says, at the same time, he says, the incoming materials allow us to trace the scheme of interaction between U.S. government agencies and Ukrainian biological objects. Attention is drawn to the involvement and the financing of these activities of structures close to the current U.S. leadership, in particular the Rosemont Seneca Investment Fund, which is headed by Hunter Biden. At the same time, the fund has a close relationship with the main contractors of the U.S. military department, including Metabiota, which, along with Black & Veatch, is the main supplier of equipment for Pentagon biolabs around the world. The scale of the program is impressive. In addition to the military department, the U.S. Agency for International Development, the George Soros Foundation, and the Center for Disease Control and Prevention are directly involved in its implementation. Scientific curation is carried out by leading researcher organizations, including the Los Alamos National Laboratory, which develops nuclear weapons as part of the Manhattan Project.
Yeah.
So he basically just said that the same laboratory that was involved in the Manhattan Project also was involved in these Ukrainian bioweapons labs.
Yeah. A lot of the that's the thing, and we can almost do a whole show on the Manhattan Project as a massively destructive operation that continued on after World War II, and it's worth. Yeah, we should probably do that at some point. But yeah, the type of fragmented, compartmentalized, highly centralized, ironic system of scientific management that was the Manhattan Project. Because the idea was that you had what was his name? I forget the director of the British Empire's Science Directorate, whose name is slipping my mind all of a sudden. He also ran the first UFO flying saucer working party, and I'm forgetting his name, but he came down to the United States. He was in charge of all British Empire science policy in 1934 to 40, and he came down in 1940 to teach Americans how to do secret science, and he's the one who directed the blueprint for what became the Manhattan Project. And one of his disciples, there's another guy, Leo Szilard, who was a disciple of H.G. Wells, a big one world government fanatic, who was also closely aligned with this fellow. They basically said, okay, what you need to do for secret science is have a highly centralized executive nerve center that would have initiated high priests that would be trusted to see what the whole is doing, but every other scientist would be not allowed to see what the next department was doing. So Los Alamos couldn't know what another research lab next to them were doing. And within Los Alamos, every subdepartment and subdepartment of that had people who were highly specialized working on a fuse, but they didn't know, no one was allowed to know what the atomic bomb project was. So it was kind of used as a model to reorganize all of society after World War II as a better way of controlling conspiracy, to fragment, the OECD, NATO, different governments, so that, again, everybody was in the practice of becoming hyper myopic and hyper specialized and intellectually incapable of seeing the whole that they were parts of. So you didn't have to get everybody in on the conspiracy. You just had to have, keep people in that broken state of mind.
So no critical thinkers. No critical thinkers. They were looking for company men who were going to keep their head down, their nose to the grindstone, and not ask questions.
Yeah, be good team players. Yeah, be well adapted, well adjusted to a team group dynamic, and only, again, a few team leaders would have a little bit more understanding of what the thing was, but even they wouldn't get the full picture, and it was only a small, again, executive nerve center that would control the cybernetics control system from the top down. And so from that standpoint, bringing in all of these unreconstructed Nazis and Japanese bioweapons specialists like Shiro
prolific bureaucrats, the Nazis. They were very good at compartmentalization.
Super talented. So were the Japanese too, and so they were able to be infused into Fort Detrick, Maryland, and into Los Alamos to start building up these super evil bioterror systems. That were then put to work in the Korean War. They were put to work in Vietnam. All sorts of weaponized anthrax and other things were tested out on civilian populations in Asia and then in Africa. And people didn't realize what they were doing because they were so mentally crippled. They couldn't see what was happening right in front of their faces. And they let this thing just grow and metastasize. So, yeah, it's powerful that the Russians were pointing that out so viscerally, that this is this is what it is.
Yeah. Well, and so let's drop the landing gear and get ready to land this plane. Yeah. But to kind of bring everything full circle, I have a specific theory that I've cultivated over the past, year and a half, but many recent months, specifically when it comes to Israel. There's a growing consensus. I actually have a video I want to play real quick. It's like a 3-minute video. It's Colonel McGregor on this will connect back to Canada, but he doesn't talk about Canada. He's talking about Israel, but I think it's going to connect back to what Trump's doing with Canada and Greenland and the Panama Canal right now, because Trump is basically leaning into this idea of we're going to revamp, we're going to restart the imperial engine and go back into empire mode, and we're going to expand our borders, and we're going to bring in Greenland, and we're going to bring in Canada, and we're going to bring back in the Panama Canal, and we're going to conquer the Gulf of Mexico and make it the Gulf of America. And, guys like Mike Cernovich, who's definitely Con Inc. in my opinion, are American imperialism is back, baby. People are going all in on this in a really, really dark way. I don't think that's what's going to end up happening. But as I said on Bradland's Daily yesterday, there's a growing consensus now among Trump haters and Trump lovers, but also Israel haters and Israel lovers, that Trump is basically owned, bought and paid for by the Israeli oligarchy, and that Netanyahu keeps Trump on a leash and he's going to do whatever Netanyahu wants. You're going to hear McGregor say that, and Judge Napolitano say that, and they've been saying this for a while. This is not a new concept from them. But let's watch this clip, and then we'll have a final little segment and wrap this up.
Do you, Secretary Blinken, worry that perhaps you have been presiding over what the world will see as a genocide?
No, it's not, first of all. Second, as to how the world sees it, I can't fully answer to that. But everyone has to look at the facts and draw their own conclusions from those facts. And my conclusions are clear.
He didn't seem very comfortable to me with his own answer. Did he seem comfortable to you, Colonel?
I don't know. I've long since lost any real respect for the man. The man does not represent the interests of the American people. He's not the Secretary of State for the United States. He's representing a foreign country with alien interests. This is the problem. We have no interest in the mass expulsion and murder of millions of Palestinian Arabs from their lands. That is not in the interest of the American people, and we don't want to do it. And this is after decades of systematic propagandizing of the American people to ultimately hate Muslims and Arabs in particular. I don't think the American people want our forces on the ground there. So I'm not really surprised at what he said. I'm just disappointed once again.
I'm disappointed when President Trump says that he's Israel's best friend. I think that's dangerous. I think it's sending a signal to Netanyahu, I'll give you even more than what old Joe gave you. What do you think?
Well, I think if he wants to be Israel's best friend, he ought to be interested in essentially de-escalating and disengaging. You know, this is not the time to escalate this war. Israel is already overstretched militarily. Economically, it's in ruins. It has no chance of holding all of the terrain that it aspires to conquer. And it's amassing enemies at a rate that boggles the mind. Virtually everyone in the Arab world, everyone in the Islamic world, and increasingly people in Europe and Asia are all turning against Israel, and unfortunately us, as a result of our unconditional support. So I think if he were a friend to Israel, he would warn against this overextension leading to Israel's destruction. But that doesn't appear to be on his mind at this point.
No, and he doesn't appear to be surrounding himself, Colonel, with people who think the way you do, at least in the national security sphere.
So that was from yesterday. You know, and look, Judge Napolitano is very close friends with Donald Trump. He talks about how Trump would call him with legal questions while he's president and like pick his brain about stuff. He's told this story many times, but I think he was talking about like a week ago on a show because he has really, really good guests on. Like he'll have Pepe Escobar, Max Blumenthal, like really thoughtful, thoughtful people on there. And so I like listening to what they have to say. Colonel McGregor, Colonel Wilkerson, among others. And he's talked about how Trump was talking to him about the JFK files and how he withheld a certain percentage of the last few pages. And Napolitano asked him, why didn't you release the last of the files? And he said, Judge, if you saw what I saw, you wouldn't have released it either. The country's not ready for it. And Napolitano has told that story many times. And recently he speculated that it was Israel that, most people, I think the country has basically accepted the fact the CIA was involved in that. I think most people at least are open to or familiar with the theory rather that the CIA was involved in the murder of JFK. I don't think revealing that to the public would be earth shattering. It might have implications for national security and, certain people having to go to prison, but I don't think it would like stop the world from spinning. I think if Israel and Mossad were revealed as being like an integral part of the murder of JFK, that would have major, major implications, like the very end of the Republican Party as we know it, given the full-throated support of Israel that the Republican Party has adopted over the past 30 years. That's what I think he's getting at. And Napolitano said the same thing. You can see like the kind of like black pilling look on Napolitano's face as he's talking about this. Like he's very almost despondent at the idea that Trump seems to be totally in Netanyahu's corner. He's surrounding himself with Zionists. Remember, McGregor was a top military advisor in the White House at the very end of Trump's term. He was one of Trump's top military advisors. So he is very familiar with Trump's thinking and was telling him what to do, or not telling him what to do, but giving him consultation and advice on geopolitical matters. Yeah. So he knows what he's talking about. Yeah. I think this is all a big feign. I've said that before. I think this is all like Trump drawing his enemies in closer, subverting the idea that, if you are of the belief that there is an Israeli oligarchy that to some extent controls Congress, controls the United States, we are beholden to them. If they know that they've lost and the jig is up, they might make every effort to destroy the country somehow, rather than scuttle the ship rather than turn it over to a new captain, so to speak. So Sun Tzu would say. Sun Tzu always says, "You don't destroy your enemy. If you have your enemy cornered and he's defeated, you don't destroy him. You give him a path of retreat. You let him leave the battlefield, and you control that path. And you either surround him and force him to surrender, or destroy him, or just let him go. Like sometimes it's just better to let him go if you know he's never going to come back." And I'm not suggesting that's what Trump's doing. I'm saying that if they think they have a path forward where they can subvert Trump in the second term, and they're like, all right, we can hunker down, we can hibernate, we can use the people around him that he's putting in place to advance our agenda items, like creating this technate of North America, like funding the war in Israel, like funding the war in Ukraine. We can do all those things with Trump as president. We'll just work around him. They're going to be a lot less likely to try to do things in the immediate future to destroy the country if they think that they can preserve themselves and outlast Trump 2.0. I think that the Zionism thing's a feign. I think the Canada thing, to a certain extent, is also a feign. I don't see Canada becoming the 51st state because I don't know if expanding the borders of the United States is in the best interest of Canada or the United States. I don't know if a bigger government is the answer to all of our problems. I think actually local government and more localized control, returning the power to the people, is our ultimate goal. And in order to do that, though, I think control of Canada has to be wrestled away from whoever is controlling it right now. And it seems like that is probably London, among other places.
Yeah.
So that's what I think this is all about. I think he's bringing a lot of attention to Canada for a very specific reason. So I do think there's an element of psychological warfare involved. But I also think he's leaning in to concepts that a lot of people are recognizing as, oh my God, he's pro globalist now. He's betraying all of the things he said he stood for, and he's leaning into Agenda 2030. He's going after he's joining the technocracy, and he's putting them in power. And to me, it doesn't add up. We've also seen him do the strategy before. May 2018, he said Kim Jong-un was fat and stupid and canceled the summit. Three weeks later, June 12th, 2018, he shows up in Singapore and does like the historic handshake with Kim Jong-un and is like, oh yeah, we're best friends now, by the way. A year later, he's walking across the DMZ. So I think that, and then don't forget the Muslim ban. He said he was going to ban all Muslims from entering the United States and deport all the Muslims in the United States. And then 4 months into his presidency, he is greeted like a conquering hero in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. So, and given the highest civilian honor they have there. So I think that there's a little bit of strategy here. I'm not hitting the panic button at all. I actually think I see something very familiar emerging. The Canada thing is fascinating, and I think it's hopefully speaks to make Canada great again, or make Canada great for the first time, however you want to look at it. But liberate it from this technocracy that controls it, probably from a foreign place.
Yeah. Well, that's a good way to round it out today. I mean, I didn't mention this, but amongst those, and I think you're generally correct. And we're going to find out based upon like my preconditions for whether this is being done lawfully or not is really in regards to how will governments react to the controlled demolition of the economy that's been many decades coming. Now we're living through it. The system is being blown out. And are we going to see programs that involve really taking on for the first time, like not a single Wall Street banker went to jail for orchestrating the 2008 crisis. Everyone's been afraid of actually dealing with that. So we're going to see like what's going to happen there. Also on the issue of the war front. Is this going to be based upon a program that will see the U.S. brought into greater harmony and collaboration on industrial progress with China, with Russia, with other countries that have rejected the Malthusian depopulation agenda? Definitely I mentioned earlier these Canada 2020 leaders that are privy counselors managing the Justin Trudeau operation. Two of them, this guy John Manley and this guy Thomas Axworthy, were on they were chairs of the task force for a North American Union based upon the Euro model with an Amaro policy. That's what they were doing. And so they were big champions of that. And at a certain point in 2008, it was decided not to go in that direction instead of doing something else. But I think that you do have people, again, Diane Carney, Mark Carney's wife, is a direct leader of this thing, of the Research and Science Board of the Canada 2020. She's also, so you got these are Malthusians. They want to control the resources, but they want to do it in order to shut down production, to bring in a Green New Deal, to bring down things that are going to destroy the ability to support life. Whereas if you have a different philosophy that sees resources as something that should be cultivated and developed in the benefit of people and in the benefit of a world at peace and collaboration instead of a world at war, then that could be a very different thing. So you could have a similar mechanism that would be good in one world if one philosophy is active, and terrible, evil in another world if another philosophy is active. So for me, those are some of the parameters of how I'm going to judge what's happening. Is, are we going to see ententes, like a real emergency conference with Russia, China, other African countries brought in with the United States to say, okay, let's reorganize in defense of the people and sovereign nation states together to rebuild our economy, reindustrialize? Or are we going to see a similar policy of geopolitical antagonisms that could lead towards, a mass depopulation agenda at some point? Are we going to see these resources developed? Or are we going to see a control politically to shut down access to the resources, as Mark Carney or other, Club of Rome freaks would like? So that's how I'm thinking about it. I'm open to both worlds right now being possible. I prefer, obviously, the one that has our kids living in harmony with other kids in other parts of the world, with a future. That's the one I'm vying for. I'm hoping for. So.
Yep, and just to be clear, I love the fact that you presented it like that. Like it's very convoluted. It's very the fog of war is hard to discern, and it could go either way, right? Like you don't know which way this is going to go. It's going to go either left or right, and one way is obviously amazing, and the other way is the end of certain things as we know it. I would argue that confusion is also probably what the bad guys are looking at, how they're looking at it. And I think they're hedging their bets like, all right, well, it's 50-50. We have enough leverage that we can make it go our way if we play along. So I feel like he's trying to keep them engaged in the game, because if they disengage, that's when they flip the table over, and they probably have the means to some extent to really cause some disruption and hurt people, given their vast resources and probably all the contingency plans they put in place over the generations of what to do in a situation like this. Like the bug out bunkers they have in the New Zealand that everyone always talks about. So we don't want that to happen, obviously. Let's hit some rants and get out of here. We hit the one from Angry Elf earlier, but we have a second one from Angry Elf, 6411, $20. Thanks, Matt and Ghost. Did not honestly expect such a great response. Looking forward to getting into this info. I'll be busy for the next 2 years. LOL, blessings. Well, thank you, Angry Elf, for your very generous rants today. Let's see if we have any Badlands boosts. Breaking history. Fernie65, $20. Your show is a must-hear every week. I've learned so much. Thanks for all your knowledge. Can you discuss why Americans are so in love with Israel? Normies will not bend when Israel is mentioned. Maybe a show topic. We actually had Sylvia in California, who's a Palestinian Christian, asked us to do the same thing, to talk about the history of Zionism. We've done a show on the deep history of Zionism, like going back like the 1800s, like the origins of it. We haven't done a show on the latter half of the 20th century and how the CIA and the neocons use impose Zionism on the American psyche and made American Christians, evangelicals, adopt it as like a part of their identity and ethos. And I do think that there would be value in probably doing that at some point. So we will absolutely have that in the queue, because I think there's a lot of great, the Western Goals Foundation. There's a lot of great branches off of that topic to talk about, and psyops, and some familiar characters that people probably would, whose names would be familiar. 14 Sheen. I hope I'm saying that right. $50. My first boost. I think you're both brilliant and wanted to show my support. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Very much appreciate that. Lufrano, $2. I wonder if Ghost has ever looked into the portals located in the Middle East, and there's a link. I've heard about such things. I've heard some pretty crazy stories from people who have been in the Middle East militarily, like deployed in the Middle East. I've heard people have told me some wild things, whether or not they're true, and not things they've seen with their own eyes, but just things that they heard when they were over there. And I'm talking about like soldiers. I'm not talking about like, generals or officers or anything. I'm just talking about guys who were on the ground there that I know personally, not Badlands guys, but just guys in my personal life. So I don't know. I mean, I've heard all kinds of things. There's obviously crazy ideas on the internet of like angels being chained up underground and portals to hell, in the Syrian desert. So who knows? But I will take a look at that link and keep it open mind. And last one, G-Man Canada, $15. We'll come to Gart if Matt goes, and just to hang out with Buzzed Ghost. Merry Christmas, boys. Hoping I get your books for Xmas, Matt. If not, I'll get them myself. Well, that's from December 21st. So by now you would know whether or not you got those books. Hope you got them. And if not, hope you will get them. That's it. So thank you all for your very generous rants today. And Merry Christmas to those who had posted those prior to Christmas. Sorry we didn't get to them sooner.
Yeah, that was cool. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah.
And for those books, if you didn't get them yet, let me know. We just got a new shipment of the author copies of these things just the other day. So if you want signed copies, send me an email. They're The Revenge of the Mystery Cults, volume 1, 2, 3. Each one's like 300 to 400 pages, and it's a wild ride. So we got those, and would be happy to send signed copies if people send me an email at Canadian Patriot 1776 at tutanota.com, and I'll give you details.
Interesting. Awesome, man. Awesome. Well, everyone, y'all have a great day. I think with that, we will do a hard exit.
Yep.
All right. See you, Matt.